West Bloomfield, Kego Harbor, Sylvan Lake. 89.3 Lakes FM. It's the Megacast, an hour-long TV and radio streaming show keeping you informed on the day-to-day news. Live from West Bloomfield, we're bringing you the news, updates, and information impacting communities around Michigan. Join our host, Tyler Kieft, as he talks with community members, business leaders, and professional experts about the stories that impact you. You're watching the Megacast on Civic Center TV. Watch Civic Center TV with our brand new live captions. To turn on live captions, go to civiccentertv.com and click Watch Live. In your web browser, click on the Options tab in the top right and find the Accessibilities tab. Then just switch on live captions to heighten your enjoyment of our local programming. Thank you so much for watching Civic Center TV. Like what you see? Beautiful works of art, masterworks of metal, and accomplishments of artistry will be on display near you. All kinds of artists from all walks of life come together to celebrate their skill and appreciate their work's beauty. Hot Works presents the 2023 Orchard Lake Fine Art Show. Stop by July 29th and 30th between 2 and 10 p.m. between Powers and Daly off of Orchard Lake Road.
Megacast 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake and 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. Today's edition of the Megacast begins now. Welcome to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Oakland County and the state of Michigan. I'm your host, Tyler Kieft. You can always find more information on our show and join us each and every day throughout your work week, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on civiccentertv.com/Megacast. That's where you'll find where we're airing each and every day live and live to tape in your hometown on a number of different community television and radio stations, and where you'll find us on demand. Also, civiccentertv.com/Megacast for full episodes and each individual segment of our program on demand every single day as well. civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Another great place to go for each and every one of our programs to follow along. It's our local news page on civiccentertv.com, where our top story this morning comes from Christine McDonald at the Detroit Free Press. As the haze from the Canadian wildfires continues to wreak havoc on air quality in our communities this week, doctors across Metro Detroit are saying that their ERs and other facilities are seeing even more people coming in with a variety of respiratory issues and ailments. Already, the National Weather Service, as well as Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE, has issued more air quality alerts throughout the week and warning those with issues such as emphysema or asthma or other breathing difficulties to avoid prolonged outdoor activity in the coming days. But now patients are reporting itchy and burning throats as well as nasal passages, among a number of other issues, to their physicians and even to local emergency rooms. Says Dr. Glenn Clark, the emergency center chief at Corewell Health's Beaumont Hospital of Grosse Pointe. Quote, "In the last week, we have seen a significant increase in respiratory complaints. We've seen both asthma and COPD patients who have all been well controlled, presenting with exacerbations requiring an increased use of asthma medications, including rescue inhalers. Even otherwise, healthy individuals have come in complaining of chest tightness," and closed quote. This has been a similar sentiment made at many other Corewell facilities, including their Beaumont hospitals in Troy and Royal Oak, per this article from the Detroit Free Press. While more people with respiratory issues have been coming in than normal, Beaumont Troy's emergency center chief, Dr. David Donaldson, has said that most of his ER patients of the recent times have due to the air quality have been those with already pre-existing conditions. Those are the asthmas, the COPDs, emphysema, and the like. That's what he's saying are the majority of people coming in for ailments related to the air quality. It's been those that are most affected by these air quality situations, these air quality alerts, those with pre-existing respiratory conditions. Per a supporting article from Frank Witzel, also from the Detroit Free Press, the National Weather Service has extended the air quality alert through today, so continue to take precautions. That means limiting your exposure to the outdoors, limiting your time outdoors. Maybe skip going for your long walk today, or a bike ride, or your run outside if you can avoid it. Due to the air quality, maybe put off going to the garden and working in your garden or working in the yard until we've gotten through the other side of this recent issue with the haze outside from the smoke coming through the wildfires from Quebec as well as Ontario, Canada. We'll have more on the air quality situation later on in the show. For now, the full article this morning on this issue pertaining particularly to how hospital systems in our local area have been affected by those coming into visit their doctors or go to the ER as a result of some respiratory issues from the air quality. That can be found on our website, top story this morning on civiccentertv.com on our local news page. Also making news this Thursday from MLive's Simon Schuster. Late yesterday, the Michigan legislature passed a new state budget at a record rate of $81.7 billion for the next fiscal year, bolstering funding in a number of areas such as education, environmental protection, economic development, and additional funding for social services and assistance. The budget includes over $24 billion in funding for Michigan schools. That's a 9% jump from last year's budget overall, as well as increased funding for community colleges at a rate of 2.8% and more funding for colleges and universities on the public side, receiving a hike of 13.6% in their funding from the state of Michigan. Also in our classrooms, universal free breakfast programs received over $150 million in funding, as well as reimbursement funding to assist teachers in paying off their student loans, an incentive that's aimed at keeping teachers in Michigan and attracting other educators out of school or from other districts across the country to come to the Great Lakes state, costing the state about $225 million in this upcoming budget. Eagle is also included in this budget, seeing its funding increase by 40%, but that is mostly coming from federal funding through 2021's federal bipartisan infrastructure bill. The budget passed in both chambers with enough of a majority between both parties for the budget to go into law immediately when signed by the governor, aided in perhaps whipping these votes by earmarking additional funding to support projects in some Republican-led districts, perhaps making the hike in other funding a little bit more palatable for those local representatives as they're presenting why they voted yes on this particular budget to their constituents. That being said, not all Republicans were satisfied with this budget or the way that it was negotiated and ultimately decided on at the statewide level. Here's a statement by local Senator Jim Runstead, a Republican from White Lake, who he sent out through his office in an email to members of the press, including our team at Civic Center TV, saying, quote, "These bloated budget bills are the serving platters of the biggest boondoggle pork fest I've ever seen cooked up in the halls of Michigan's capital. And to say it leaves a bad and bitter taste in one's mouth is an understatement. It is utterly bewildering that the first budget passed by the new Democratic majority, Democrats having a majority in both the House and the Senate, as well as having Governor Whitmer in office in the executive branch, which shouted for decades while the minority was in the lead about a real need for more legislative transparency, him saying in that case that the same Democrats that are now leading were complaining about transparency while the Republicans were in power in Lansing in the House and in the Senate putting together these budgets. And he said that is perhaps the most most secretive budget in history, and I cannot support it. So Jim Runstead, local state senator from our area here in the Lakes area, operating out of White Lake, calling this budget the most secretive budget in state history. Senator Runstead continued on in his statement saying, in just 6 months, Democrats have successfully plundered the pockets of Michigan taxpayers, burning through the state's $9 billion budget surplus on an unsuitable spending spree of pet projects, favored corporate handouts, and big government. They have done this behind closed doors, in the dark, unashamed and unaccountable, while Santa Whitmer and her legislative elves empty the vaults and max out the credit cards to party like it's Christmas in June. The ghost of Christmas future is waiting nearby to collect on the tab, and who will be left to pay? The Michigan taxpayers who cannot afford it. That's who, and close quote. That part of a statement made by Senator Jim Runstead, who was not in support of this new fiscal year budget. You can find more information on this budget from MLive by clicking through this article on our local news page today, civiccentertv.com. More headlines coming up on our local news page in just a little bit, but first, our weekly mental health segment with Carrie Krawiec from the Birmingham Maple Clinic. That's coming up next. Stay tuned. You're watching and listening to the Megacast.
Ronnie started doing prescription pills at the age of 15, and by 19, he died. If your child is struggling with drug use, try not to be too proud to reach out for help. Don't be worried about what the neighbor will think or your family. Just get your child the help they need. Sometimes it's the hard road to take, but the hard road is nothing compared to living with the fact that your child is no longer with you.
There's hope and help at drugfree.org.
How do you know when you've made the right decision? It's the feeling you get in your gut. The one that tells you what's right or wrong. It's the one that says, sure, I can have a drink. Or the feeling that says, okay, I've been drinking. Now what? It's the voice inside you that says, I'm buzzed. Better leave the car when it's time to go. Plan ahead. Catch a sober ride. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Oakland County and the state of Michigan. I'm your host, Tyler Kieft. As always, you can find more information on the program and keep up to date with us and our partnering stations right here in Oakland County by visiting civiccentertv.com/Megacast, where you'll also find all of our full episodes and each individual segment on demand. civiccentertv.com/Megacast is the place to go to find all things about our program each and every day of the week and throughout the weekends, whenever you'd like to watch us on our website, civiccentertv.com. Joining us now, as she does each and every week for our weekly mental health segment, is Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Carrie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on, as June is National Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Month and included a celebration or recognition, actually, of National PTSD Awareness Day. Earlier on this week on Tuesday, that was National PTSD Awareness Day. And so as we talk about PTSD, we should first start off by discussing the similarities and the differences between post-traumatic stress disorder and the basic overlapping issues with trauma. So these are two very similar cases, two very similar issues that people may face with their mental health, but they also have some differences to them. Let's first start off by explaining the difference between PTSD and trauma.
Well, like many mental health conditions, although we're so happy that they get more and more recognition, what happens is people use the term sort of interchangeably, or they become, very casual terms. But PTSD actually describes a prolonged mental health diagnosis that happens as a result of trauma. So trauma is something that people experience, a distressing event. It could be something like witnessing a crime or an act of war. It could be like being the victim of a crime, losing a family member in a distressing way. There are sort of many events in a person's life that can be considered traumatic. And there are traumas that happen as like single isolated incidents, for example, like a house fire, or there's traumas that are prolonged, like being in a domestically abusive relationship where traumas happen successively. So trauma is about the experiencing of an event. And we would expect a person to have a reaction as a result of trauma, maybe some sleepless nights or, some agitation or fast beating heart in the days and weeks following an event. What happens with trauma is that those intense reactions persist for a great deal of time after the actual event.
And then in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder, because trauma tends to be, as you said, a little bit more of an acute diagnosis, where post-traumatic stress disorder is more of that long-term enduring of the trauma. How do those then differ in the effects that they can have on people, given that trauma can be quite severe even in the interim, but post-traumatic stress disorder is kind of more of that long-term continuous beatdown of these symptoms?
Sure. So like you and I have talked so many times before, we expect a range of feelings in all people, like anxiety, depression when something's sad, anxiety when something is stressful. Trauma is the same way. We expect a reaction when you've undergone a traumatic event. It's actually part of the way your body and mind are trained to rescue you, to ignite your fight or flight response. The difference with post-traumatic stress disorder is that heightened fight or flight response persists even in the absence of actual distressing events happening in the present. And that is what makes it a disorder.
And then in the case of how these are recognized, what symptoms may be, how can you really tell that difference if you or someone else maybe working through either just generalized trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, if they're maybe not addressing that with a mental health professional or other physician, and are simply just living their life, continuing to feel these effects day in and day out?
You're absolutely right. For some people, the symptoms may be externalized. They may be more irritable or agitated. They may be more jumpy. You can sort of witness those things, or people can sort of recognize those things as symptoms, but some of them happen internally or in private, and those can be much harder to diagnose and much harder for even an individual person to recognize, as these are the results of trauma, especially things when we talk about fight or freeze. Freeze is that kind of dissociating, avoidant behavior, is that someone may not necessarily even know they're doing it, nor do the people around them. And so it can be a trained professional can be very useful in uncovering those symptoms. Also, with things like we said, like acute trauma is perhaps some obvious one-time traumatic event where all of us sort of societally can agree, yes, that was in fact traumatic. So of course you would have symptoms related to it, but some of the more we call like chronic traumas or even complex traumas, there's sort of maybe derivatives of other traumas. Those can be a lot harder for people to identify, and they say, oh, I'm just like living life, and they might not even consider them trauma, or other people in their life are saying, well, that wasn't so bad, but that the effects can still linger and the effects can still be there, and can be hard for a person to even recognize that it was in fact traumatic. They just thought it was their life.
Yeah, treating generalized trauma, I would imagine, can be a little bit tough to get moving forward, because you are unpacking so much that is perhaps a negative in somebody's life, or a constant reminder of that negative, to get to the point where you're understanding where they're at and what sort of treatment might be best for them. In terms of post-traumatic stress disorder, given that it is such a prolonged condition of symptoms, how does that make it that much more difficult to start to unpack and really figure out where you may need to go, or where another professional may need to go with one particular patient?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the act of being traumatized, especially if you were victimized in some way, is going to really upset your sense of safety. And so part of the therapeutic relationship is to create an environment that feels safe enough to even start delving into really vulnerable parts of a person's experience. And so that can be in the beginning a first hurdle. There are methods of treatment now that have, gained popularity over the last several years, EMDR being one, where part of the intervention is about giving a person those tools to feel safe and not emotionally flooded in their experience, so that they can adequately process their experiences. It's a very effective method for the treatment of trauma and PTSD.
And so what are some of the other ways that can be treated too? And how do those then work to help somebody recover, or at least reduce the symptoms that they're feeling from PTSD or other generalized trauma?
So the act of a traumatic event, especially one that, either successive traumatic events, it really changes the brain. Like we said, it causes this fight or flight response to be like sort of more easily triggered than it would in the absence. And so, helping a person retrain their brain, right, to like reassociate with things that are calming. Cognitive behavior therapy techniques can be used to help a person, reassign what thoughts and feelings they've attached to certain behaviors. EMDR, like I said, can help by kind of creating space where a person can both talk about and understand and explore their experience without feeling the intense emotions associated with them. Because sometimes the desire to not feel such intense emotions is kind of, we all sort of as humans want to do something to sort of restore sort of normalcy. And if we're feeling really intense emotions, it can make it really hard for us to think, talk, act normally, especially even in therapy sessions. So EMDR can be helpful to both separate that emotional experience from being able to understand it, learn about it, and gain some clarity on it.
Joining us on the program today is Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic, who joins us each and every week for our weekly mental health segment. You can find more information on ways to get in contact with Carrie and the other professionals at the Birmingham Maple Clinic on their website, birminghammaple.com, and find all of our segments with Carrie Krawiec and the Birmingham Maple Clinic on civiccentertv.com/megacast. And Carrie, continue on with the treatment methods as these are being undergone, as people with either acute stress situations or those with long-term post-traumatic stress disorder. As they're going through these therapies, what tend to be the typical timelines of outcomes in terms of how this helps them in their recovery, helps them in their day-to-day living, given that trauma is still lingering there and it's not going to be something that you're going to get a treatment done and it's going to immediately be gone. It's still going to be there and you're still going to need treatment over time.
Sure, there's no magic wand or magic pill to alleviate the feelings immediately. And I think as with any form of therapy and any issue, it's really case specific. It depends on each person's history and personality. It depends on their sense of safety and comfort in therapy. If they've had successful therapies before or if they're new to therapy, of course, those are going to be different features, really educating about the process. Right. And people's openness or willingness to try therapy is, of course, going to be another constraining factor. So it really is unique to each individual person, and each individual therapist. It will also be decide sort of like how fast they expedite versus kind of either slower, kind of steadier methodology. So that's really just dependent. So, the most successful treatment is when it is a good fit between client and therapist. So if you're with someone and you're not sure it's a good fit, either the methods they use or their own personality or style, perhaps trying another therapist may be successful, but really having that comfortable fit is one of the strongest predictors of success in treatment.
And so as a therapist, as you're treating individuals that may have undergone trauma and you're trying to develop that relationship, what steps are you taking as you're preparing to speak to them for the first time or the first few times, and as you're going into those conversations to establish that safe basis of conversation and to open them up to discussing what they've gone through and how they can essentially reprogram some of those traumatic signals in their mind to relieve them of some of these symptoms?
Certainly therapists are trained, you're assessing a person's history, their life events, or even their present and what's brought them in and creating goals for what they need or what they identify. But also keeping in mind there are things that perhaps might be uncovered along the way. Therapists use almost like layers of the onion, right? Or like things might be unearthed that are unexpected, and just to be able to be calm, responsive, appropriate, and attuned to those things and respond as they come up. And then certainly, like I said, offering education. There's time where we may tap into something that neither you or I expected would cause an emotional reaction or would be connected to something perhaps traumatic or a memory. And then in the event when we uncover those, like this is how we will respond. And just taking time or space to notice the subtle and obvious signs that perhaps you've touched onto something traumatic and stopping there and educating. It's almost like something surgical. If you sort of open someone up looking for one thing and then you find another, you have to sort of pause, reevaluate, and take whatever steps to make sure that person is going to be healthy and safe. And the same goes when we're uncovering emotional, historical things that may or may not be traumatic or connected to traumas in the present.
And in terms of friends or family or other people in these individuals' lives, whether they are aware of this person's stress disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder, what can they do to help these individuals along as they're undergoing their treatment, as they are unpacking some of these issues that may or may not involve friends or family or other people in what was inciting in that trauma?
Yeah, I think that perhaps one rule of thumb is that, like, the person who is using the phrase trauma or not is really, it's in the eye of the beholder. So that's an each person individual thing. So if someone shares an experience and says, I was traumatized by this, to really be cautious to say, well, that wasn't traumatic, or that wasn't that bad, or I've been through so much worse and I don't respond the way you do. That trauma is an experience that belongs to each person individually and cannot really be sufficiently judged or denied by somebody else. That's not their place, and to just really honor what a person is telling you is traumatic, and responding to them compassionately and curiously and kind.
And especially in recent years, as we've seen collectively issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, kids being in and out of school and away from socializing, especially in those young kids as they're in their developmental years and they're not getting that normal socialization, and they're all of a sudden thrust into a highly social situation like school, or even those that have immigrated to the U.S. from places like Ukraine or Afghanistan or other war-torn nations. There's so many different things that have caused maybe acute or even post-traumatic stress disorders of late. So how much of an increase have we seen in recent years, particularly with COVID-19, of more of these cases popping up in our clinics like yours in Birmingham Maple?
Gosh, off the top of my head, I don't know the statistics on how we're seeing it, but I think that we are seeing even just, trauma-informed therapists, and perhaps the diagnosis are also increasing because someone may have been presenting in an anxious way, but not necessarily identifying one unique trauma. And now we're much more aware of what we call those C traumas, like the chronic traumas or the complex traumas, which is different than the acute traumas. And historically, a diagnosis of PTSD required, the experience of a trauma, and kind of defined in a way, like we said, these sort of like one-time, mutually agreed upon traumas, the house fire, a war, a rape, something very specific. But now we're gaining the awareness that the effects of trauma can look very different for different people and be connected to a host of different events, and not even events that happen to an individual, but like what we call like transgenerational trauma, but the after effects of trauma that's happened perhaps in a generation before, such as exile, a refugee, leaving one country to another. There may be trauma associated even if you were not the first generation to encounter it.
Yeah, just following up on that, Carrie, transgenerational trauma is something that has been more and more recognized in recent years, in the recent decade, especially as being something that could affect people in those next generations down the line, even if they haven't necessarily experienced firsthand the traumas that incited those of their ancestors or other relatives. So with that being the case, and with that being something that could affect future generations, just how do those lingering effects then pass on? How does that manifest in those next generations?
Sure. Well, it's going to impact how, like, for example, if a person is a child or young adult, when they encounter a trauma and then they become a parent themselves, their attitudes about the world, about safety, their vigilance, their anxiety, their agitation is all, of course, going to have an effect on how their own children then are raised and how their own children come to learn and understand safety, vulnerability, and those kinds of things. It may even impact the environments they put themselves in, either intentionally or as a result of stuff that's happened before. For example, homelessness, substance abuse, things like that. Those things then are going to have effects of their own.
And is that going to make them, is that going to make these next generations, the fact that their parent or another close relative of theirs, even a couple generations out, may have faced a post-traumatic stress situation or acute stress, does that make them more likely to be susceptible to those sort of symptoms or those sort of outcomes themselves?
Well, certainly across most mental health diagnosis that if you have a family member who has met the criteria for diagnosis, there is an increased likelihood. Of course, there's, both the issue of nature and nurture. So some of those qualities are genetic and predisposed, and some of them are about just environmental factors. So it's certainly plausible that the likelihood would increase, but there's sort of a variety of reasons why.
Carrie Krawiec joins us from the Birmingham Maple Clinic on today's edition of the Megacast. More information can be found from the Birmingham Maple Clinic on birminghammaple.com, birminghammaple.com, or join us here on the Megacast. And you can find our segments online, civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Carrie, anything else that we should know at this time about treating stress disorders, and particularly post-traumatic stress disorder, as we're recognizing Post-Traumatic Stress Month?
I think something that we've talked about before, right, is that resiliency. Resiliency is the quality of human beings that we have to bounce back from difficult and challenging things. And there are factors that help resiliency. One of them is being able to talk about and share the story, both hard and how both the parts that have been traumatic and challenging, and the parts about getting and working through them. That being able to share your story with someone is one of the factors of resiliency, which is one testament to therapy, but also to seeking support from close family members. Learning other people's stories and sharing your own helps us collectively gain from each other's strengths and courage, and knowing we're not alone, which are all protective features moving forward.
Carrie, thank you as always for joining us, and especially to talk about an issue that affects so many people in a variety of different ways and can have a number of different lingering effects. It's important to talk about these issues and be able to recognize what this looks like and what steps people have ahead of them. Thank you as always.
Thank you for having me.
BirminghamMaple.com is their website to get in contact with Carrie and the other professionals at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. We'll take a break on the Megacast. On the other side, more headlines making news on our local news page today about the smoke that's in the air still from the wildfires in Canada. How is that continuing to affect us right here and right now? How's that affecting local events, especially as we head into the 4th of July weekend? And should this all pass, what fun may be in store right here in Oakland County over the 4th of July holiday? Stay tuned. We'll learn about that and more. And later on, it's our Oakland Schools Education Insider. This is the Megacast.
Looking for a midweek meal? Keep the bag lunch at home this summer and enjoy street food in your neighborhood with Food Truck Tuesdays. Enjoy cuisine from around Michigan outside the WB Parks and Recreations Activity Center with a different vendor every Tuesday, like Vegged Out on July 11th. All summer, every Tuesday, Food Truck Tuesday. This community update from Civic Center TV and 89.3 Lakes FM.
There are many different kinds of noses. Our noses can sniff out all kinds of things. Good things and bad things. Your nose knows if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
I don't know why you're so sad. You've got a roof over your head.
You gotta stop with that depression stuff. That's what white people think. You alright?
It just feels like it's coming from everywhere.
Do you want to talk about it?
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Oakland County and the state of Michigan. I'm your host, Tyler Kieft. You can always find us online, civiccentertv.com/megacast, where you'll find more information on all of our partnering stations and their original programming right here in Oakland County and throughout the state of Michigan on outlets such as My Michigan TV, and find every episode and each individual segment on demand as well. civiccentertv.com/megacast is the place to go for all of that. Continuing on this morning, more news making headlines on our local news page on civiccentertv.com, currently from Irina Lee at Bridge, Michigan. As we continue to look outside and see hazy sky conditions, low air quality continues to be reported by the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE, as well as the local branches of the National Weather Service all throughout southeastern Michigan. That leaves many wondering when the smoke will finally clear after days of extremely low air quality that's placed Detroit and the metro area amongst some of the worst air quality of any city or metro area in the entire world. EGLE, who has extended air quality alerts all throughout this week, says wind patterns are expected to change, which may help with getting some of the smoke out of our area, but likely won't immediately relieve us of the ozone and wildfire smoke lingering in our air. The smoke has ventured over 500 miles to our local area from wildfires in Quebec and Ontario, and with unique smells has brought many to question what is going on in our skies, and some even theorizing if that is smoke in fact at all. Per EGLE, the plastic kind of smell that you've maybe noticed in the air over the past several days is a result of fire from the wood in those wildfires, and the residue from those fires being in the atmosphere and exposed for prolonged periods to ultraviolet radiation from the sunlight, making them become overpowered by chemical compounds such as formaldehyde and benzene, which emit a plastic-like smell. That is what you've noticed perhaps over the past few days. If you've noticed when you've been outside, there's been an odd kind of burnt plastic-like smell. That is the reason these particles from massive fires and all the smoke and all the particulate matter that has plumed into those clouds of smoke and traveled throughout the atmosphere from Quebec and Ontario and into our local area has had prolonged exposure to sunlight. It's been closer to the sun. It's had less protection from parts of the environment as it's risen into the atmosphere, and therefore been further exposed to the ultraviolet light in a way that has overpowered those chemical compounds in the air and turned that into what smells like a bit of plastic. You can keep safe from doing that in a number of different ways. Keeping inside of your home, if you don't need to be outside for prolonged periods, is a great idea. If you are outside, some are even suggesting wearing a mask, wearing an N95 mask outdoors, depending on how low the air quality actually is. In addition to that, if you're inside, you can run your air conditioning to ventilate certain areas of your home. If you can run that on recirculating air, that means that it's taking the air from inside your home, or it's most likely that you're going to have recirculating AC capabilities in your car. That'll keep that air flowing through, not the air coming in from outside, being filtered, and then being circulated through your vehicle or through your home. Closing your windows, keeping it in a well-ventilated area of your home also will help to prevent some of that air from outside that has that particulate matter from the fires from getting into your home and possibly affecting you, especially if you are already suffering from respiratory ailments like emphysema or asthma, or you're more prone to respiratory symptoms. Avoiding the outdoors for prolonged periods is also a pretty good idea for you for the time being until this smoke passes. Hopefully in the next couple of days, but we don't have any exact estimation of when the smoke will be out of the area at this time. A full article with even more information on ways you can keep yourself safe while we still have the smoke in the air from those Canadian wildfires here in Metro Detroit and throughout southeast Michigan. That Bridge, Michigan article is linked on our website, civiccentertv.com, on our local news page. The air quality is also affecting fun and games here in Oakland County, with many local events and activities modified postponed or outright canceled yesterday in our local area. That included some West Bloomfield Parks events that were either moved indoors or postponed per their social media, and the Oakland Press's Peg McNichol in an article listed also on our website this morning on civiccentertv.com on our local news page writes that the smoke led to cancellation of fireworks in Rochester Hills and at Wabeek Country Club in Bloomfield Hills as well. In addition, Troy officials said that the city is closing their outdoor public pool during the air quality alert in order to prevent people from prolonged outdoor exposure to the particulates in the atmosphere. According to Eagle reports noted by Peg McNichol in this article, by Wednesday afternoon, parts of southeast Michigan saw air quality in the ranges of harmful for people with respiratory issues to being simply harmful across the board, prompting health officials, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, to even suggest that some individuals wear N95 masks while outdoors. An interesting change of pace from just a couple of years ago, where outdoors you were fine, no mask, and indoors you'd want to put that mask on. Now they're saying if you're outdoors, maybe you should have that mask on, especially if you're suffering from asthma. That could help to reduce some of the symptoms caused. N95 masks are available at City Hall. That is at 375 Depot Road, but while supplies last. That is for the city of Clarkston. So if you are with us on our network this week in Clarkston and you're in need of some N95 masks, they are available for free while supplies last at Clarkston City Hall. That full article is linked on our website this morning, civiccentertv.com, on our local news page. We also have an additional article that goes into some details about fun events over the 4th of July weekend. Should this smoke in the air dissipate and these events not end up being postponed or canceled like we've seen on Wednesday and like we may even likely see on this Thursday, there's plenty of fun planned for the 4th of July weekend. Check that out as you're trying to make your plans for the long weekend on civiccentertv.com on our local news page. One final article that we are not going to go over for time purposes from our friends at the Detroit News, Kylie Martin, highlighting many local fun events in our community. We'll take a break on the Megacast. On the other side, we'll talk with another official from Oakland Schools for a bi-weekly Oakland Schools Education Insider, talking about what happens in the summer to plan for the fall, and especially as teachers, educators, administrators try to build a safe and collaborative culture in their school environments. We'll be joined next with an individual from Oakland Schools to talk about that and more. Stay tuned. You're watching and listening to the Megacast.
Wondering what to say to someone who's been sexually assaulted or abused?
I believe you.
I'm so sorry this happened.
It's not your fault.
Confidential and anonymous help is available at the Michigan Sexual Assault Hotline. Connect with us 24/7. Call 855-VOICES-4 or text 1-866-238-1454 for help. Learn more at michigan.gov/voices4.
Can I ask you a question? Why do you want to get the COVID-19 vaccine?
I don't like getting sick.
The virus will die.
It will be easy to not catch it.
Keep my family safe and keep playing soccer.
Because I love being vaccinated.
What's your hope for everyone?
I hope everybody gets the vaccine.
To keep safe and strong.
Be like happy, having fun everywhere.
Everyone stay safe and hope you get the vaccine.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Oakland County and the state of Michigan. I'm your host, Tyler Kieft. You can always stay up to date with us on civiccentertv.com/Megacast, where you'll find information on all of our partnering stations joining us live and live to tape throughout the week on our live shows from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and also find all of our full programs and each individual segment on demand as well. civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Joining us now for our bi-weekly Oakland Schools Education Insider segment is the Supervisor of School Culture and Climate for our intermediate school district, Oakland Schools. Patricia Chinn joins us now on the Megacast. Patricia, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, glad Yeah, glad to have you on to talk about your role in Oakland Schools as their school culture and climate supervisor. Define that role for us and what you're working on, both with Oakland Schools as the intermediate school district, but also our local school districts on a day-to-day basis throughout the year.
Absolutely. So at Oakland Schools, we have a couple of different units. And so I supervise the school culture and unit, or school culture and climate unit. And that is just as it sounds. School culture and climate. What are the things that make kids have happy, safe, positive environments that allow staff to feel safe and positive in their environments so that they can get to the good work of teaching and learning? We do lots of different projects throughout the year and even into the summer. So here we are still working on a couple of upcoming projects and really excited about those things in the works.
So the work continues on in the summer. Just because school is out doesn't mean that work to continue to build the culture and to improve the climate in our local schools and throughout our local area. That doesn't mean that goes on the back burner until the fall begins. So what sort of work does happen over the summer to continue to cultivate that culture in our schools going forward?
Absolutely. You know, Oakland Schools is a year-round service agency. And despite the fact that we think teachers and schools shut it down for the summer, they don't. They're planning with us and they're prepping. And so some of the major projects we have in the works right now that we're planning for is Here For You, which is an awareness campaign for students to increase awareness of the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety and to diminish mental health stigma and to facilitate connections between peers and trusted adults in their community. We are working with districts currently for our Prepare model, which is a safety and crisis planning and response program. And we're also doing a lot of planning on a mental health grant that we are looking to implement starting in the fall, but would occur over 2 years with 6 of our districts, really focused on developing strong mental health systems, which include a component focused on family engagement. So really building the system and including our communities in those systems.
And so taking a step back and thinking about all these different programs that go into cultivating and continuing to foster those strong relationships between students and other students, students and teachers and faculty, and all those relationships that go into creating a welcoming school environment, what are those most important elements that your team and that teams in our individual school districts are focusing on to continue to build on those building blocks each and every school year and then each and every day of those individual school years?
Yeah, I think that's a really big question because culture and climate is a really big topic, and building on those pieces, you know, obviously our primary role is to develop good humans that are strong learners. And so to do that, we have to build a foundation where they feel safe, they feel connected, they feel like they belong. And so a lot of different projects that we work on with districts are around looking at their system as a whole and how do we develop goals to support them through the continuous improvement process in seeing where are the gaps in the way that we're providing a healthy, safe, and positive environment. How can we maybe fill those gaps with some different systems or some different pieces, components? How might we provide professional learning or resources at Oakland Schools to our districts to support them with that? But then also, how can we really develop sustainable models? So models that are financially sustainable, but also models that are sustainable with the people that live within the system. Really important components around mental health, important components around social emotional learning, and important components around awareness, multi-tiered systems of support. So when I say it's a really big question, it's a really big question because those systems can really encompass a lot of people.
And then ultimately, what are the impact of these different systems that are in place, these different programs are in place in improving student performance in the classrooms, certainly student mood and student mental health? How have these actually been effective in helping make improvements in our schools in recent years as the mental health, as the stability of the relationships between the student body and the faculty and the administrators and every one of those relationships that goes into making a school? How's that really changed how the school experience is for our kids in recent years as this has taken on a greater focus?
Absolutely. You know, I think we originally I'll just say prior to COVID, we had a lot of really strong systems in place that helped kids to feel safe, feel like they belonged. They kind of just knew school's a safe place for me to be. These are sort of my people, my friends, my teachers, people that I feel comfortable with, people that I know, how to interact with. And then with COVID, we had to shift our models completely and move to these online types of instruction, which does at times sort of put a stint in that connectedness. And so we worked really hard to build connectedness within those environments, but then recognized that when we came back, we focused really heavily on instruction, and we need to now continue to focus really heavily on that connectedness, that belonging. Because when kids feel connected and when they belong and they feel safe, they're able to do what they need to do to learn. And if they don't feel connected, there's a lot of research that supports that if I'm not feeling connected, it's really hard for me to focus and be present in the learning. So we want to make sure that we're really supporting districts to build those positive, connected cultures that allow kids to walk in and be ready to learn. They're ready to take on what teachers are offering, and they're ready to take on the learning in line with a lot of that research that's out there. And we're seeing as schools are going sort of back to their roots, if you will, back to positive behavior intervention systems and things of that nature that build that deep tier 1 support for climate and culture, that they're having a lot of success. Kids are starting to feel that again. That's that space of, I belong here. This is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm connected, and I'm learning, and I can grow in that space. And teachers are feeling the same with those systems in place.
Patricia Chinn is the Supervisor of School Culture and Climate for Oakland Schools, the intermediate school district here in Oakland County that works alongside many of our local school districts in a variety of different ways for a variety of different initiatives. And in this case, as you have these systems in place, these policies in place, or these benchmarks that you are setting on the Oakland Schools level, how does that then expand into the relationship on the individual school district level? How are you assisting our local school districts then in also implementing these sort of benchmarks, but also doing it in their own way and understanding that it's going to have to be different from one school district to another, all of which have different cultures, different individuals, different personalities that are playing into how these are effective?
Absolutely. So just as you said, every district has its own personality, has its own community, looks very different from district to district. So we can't just say, here's one set of guidelines and how you do everything. Here's one program, or here's one way that you can start to check off the boxes. So we work individually. Our consultant teams work individually with districts to really think about what their needs assessments would say around their well-being goals. We come from a place of the whole child system, or the whole child model, where we look at the 10 components of the whole child, and we say, how do we best create an environment that's healthy, that's safe, that's engaged, that's supportive, and that's challenging to our kids? Because we want to make sure that they're meeting all of those pieces, but looking at those 10 main components of the whole child is a really strong way to get started. And then we go through the continuous improvement process from the state through the MyKit process is a really great foundational piece. We have consultants that meet with districts specifically for that. And then we have consultants that go out and just essentially look at and say, okay, what is your data telling us that you have happening really well? And from an appreciative standpoint, how can we build on that? And then maybe what is your data telling us are some of the gap spaces that we want to make sure to backfill in some capacity, either whether it's with programming or whether it's better systems components. How can we best support that? And then, of course, we funnel some grant monies from the state through into our districts, such as 31 Ed, which is providing increased mental health supports to general education students. Our regional assistance grant, which is providing additional supports, whether it be academically or within culture and climate, to support our districts that are identified as needing that extra boost of support. But a lot of that is really funneled through that continuous improvement process, looking at what are the things that we're doing really well, What are the things that we need to set as goals? And then what might be those sort of markers, if you will, along the way that we can check in with to ensure that we're meeting those goals in the appropriate ways.
In August, Oakland Schools is going to be hosting a 4-day-long Building a Whole Child System Conference. This is going to be August 7th through August 10th, 2023, and just a little bit over a month this will be happening. But before we get into what's going to happen at the actual conference, let's talk about that concept as a whole. What does it mean to educate the whole child?
So educating the whole child is really, just as it sounds. We use a lot of acronyms in education, but this is not one. So it really is just as it sounds. It really is looking at the whole piece of the child, every component that goes into them, and saying, how do we support that child? How are we supporting their health? How are we supporting their safety? How are we supporting and building systems that engage them in their learning and in their community? How are we building systems that help them to feel supported? And how are we building systems that help them to feel challenged? Because we know kids learn better when they feel challenged. So it really is about those 10 main components that fit into those 5 tenets and look at, just as it sounds, the whole child within that picture.
And then, so to build on that, what will be discussed at this conference? What sort of professional development opportunities will be available to professionals in the community or others that may be able to participate in this Building a Whole Child System Conference happening in August?
Yeah, so the design of the conference is really for educators within Oakland County. Monday and Thursday, so it's Monday through Thursday. Monday and Thursday are team-based days, so your team that works on well-being within your district would come, and we'll really walk them through that whole child model and how to develop that model and develop the system for that model. And then Tuesday and Wednesday are breakout days, which means we have a variety of sessions that people can come and learn from, different presenters. So it might be things around data, it might be things around that Michigan continuous improvement process. It might be things around mandated reporter and or human trafficking for some of our social workers and folks in the mental health field. But it's just a lot of opportunities for people to gather information that's connected to that whole child model so that they can build then their own skill set within the model to support our kids individually.
Joining us on the program is Patricia Chinn, the Supervisor of School Culture and Climate with Oakland Schools on our Oakland Schools Education Insider segment. Patricia, another minute or so left before we'll need to wrap things up today. Anything else that we should know about what efforts are being taken day in and day out all throughout the year, including in the summers, by Oakland Schools and our individual school districts to continue to build a more positive, a welcoming, and educationally friendly environment for our kids and really for the whole community?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would recommend to our educators and our families is just that partnership is what builds strong community, and strong community builds strong culture and climate. And so we'd love for our Oakland County educators to join us at our August summit. And they can go to our events management page to get more information and to register. We'd love to see families out at a program called View Fest that we'll be at the Detroit Zoo on July 16th. That's an opportunity to just have some awareness and celebration around supports for people that are dealing with and informing themselves around mental health. And we're going to have some handouts with services and things like that. So that's one of the summer projects we're working on, but we'll also have some fun giveaway items. So we hope to see families there and our educators there. But really, it's just summer for us is really an opportunity to plan and ensure that we're in the best space to support our districts throughout the year and to help our district leadership to plan and make sure that they're in the best space for their teachers to move forward as they get ready to start up another wonderful school year.
The Building a Whole Child System Conference through Oakland Schools happens August 7th through August 10th. Educators, if you're interested, go to Oakland Schools' website to find more information. And you do have to register for each and every one of those days, and it's capped off at 200 people. So get in on it as early as possible. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I wish you guys a wonderful day.
You as well. That is going to do it for today's edition of the Megacast. As always, you can find more information on our website on civiccentertv.com/Megacast on all of our partnering stations and find our full shows and each individual segment on demand as well. Big thank you to our entire crew, Anthony Juba, establishing our broadcast at Civic Center TV, and our director at Master Control at the studio of My Michigan TV in Troy, Jared Clark. Until next time, I'm Tyler Kieft. Take care of each other, and we'll see you very soon.